The conference room at Hartwell and Pierce smelled like mahogany and climate control, and the particular tension of people who have been waiting for something for a long time and are finally in the room, where it will be resolved. There were 7 of us. My mother's attorney, Bernard Hartwell, 71 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who wears his authority the way other men wear their watches, without reference to whether anyone else notices. His paralegal, a woman named Claire who had brought water glasses for everyone and had not looked directly at any of us since we arrived. My mother's sister, Aunt Rowena, my cousin Philip. My mother's neighbor and oldest friend, Mrs. Patricia Dunn, who had been named in earlier wills and had driven from Savannah specifically for this. My sister, Celeste, and me. My mother, Helen Grace Abernethy, had died 11 days earlier. She was 79. She had been, for the whole of my life, a woman of deliberate decisions, a retired high school principal who had applied the same methodical precision to her personal life that she had applied to 4 decades of educational administration. She did not do things accidentally. She did not say things she didn't mean. And she did not, in 47 years of family dinners and holiday arguments, and the particular accumulated weight of a family that had loved each other imperfectly and sincerely, leave things to chance. Bernard Hartwell opened the folder. He read, "The primary estate assets, the house in Macon, assessed at $340,000. The investment account at First Meridian Wealth Management, valued at $612,000 at date of death. The contents of the house. The 2019 Volvo." He read the distribution. The house, to Celeste, outright. The investment account, to Celeste, outright. The Volvo, to Celeste. The contents of the house, to Celeste, with the specific exception of certain personal items designated in a separate addendum. The certain personal items designated in the separate addendum. To me, a jewelry box, 3 photograph albums, my grandmother's china set, a jewelry box, 3 albums, china. I looked at the table. I did not look at Celeste, but I heard her. She exhaled, not dramatically, not performatively. The exhale of someone releasing a breath they have been holding since the morning their mother died, now confirmed in its destination. And then she said, in the particular quiet of someone who does not need to raise their voice because the document has already said everything, "You get nothing." Mom made that very clear. She said it the way you say something that is simply true. Mrs. Patricia Dunn looked at the table. Aunt Rowena looked at her hands. Bernard Hartwell looked at his folder. Then he reached beside the folder, and he picked up an envelope, cream-colored, letter-sized, sealed with wax, my mother's specific, characteristic affectation for important correspondence. A habit she had maintained since she was 26 years old, and had decided that certain things deserved to be marked as significant. On the front, in my mother's handwriting, 2 words, for Bernard. He looked at the room over his reading glasses. "There is," he said, "a second document. My name is Iris Abernethy Marsh. I am 46 years old. I am a high school music teacher in Atlanta, which is, I am aware, the least financially impressive introduction I have made in this narrative so far. And I mention it because it is relevant to understanding what my mother understood about my life and what she chose to do about it. My sister Celeste is 51. She is a commercial real estate attorney in Macon with a well-appointed office and a client list and the specific confidence of someone who has spent her adult life in rooms where the outcome was favorable and has come to expect this as a natural condition. We are 5 years and 1 psychological universe apart. My mother raised us with the same love. I believe this. I have always believed this, but not with the same assumptions. Celeste was the practical one, the structured one, the one who became an attorney and who managed my mother's legal affairs in her final decade, and who was, in the language of our family, the responsible one. I was the one who played piano at the church, who drove 3 hours to visit my mother on a random Tuesday because I had a feeling she might want company, who sat with her through her hip surgery recovery for 6 weeks in 2019, sleeping on her guest bed, making her tea at 3 a.m. when the pain kept her awake. I was also the one she talked to. Not about finances, not about legal matters, about the things that don't have line items, what she regretted, what she was proud of, what she wanted her life to have meant by the time it concluded. In the last 2 years of her life, my mother talked to me about the will, not the contents, the thinking behind it. Celeste handles the practical matters, she said once, during one of those 3 a.m. conversations in her kitchen. That's what she's always done. The house, the finances, she's been managing it for years. It makes sense for the assets to stay where the management has been. I understand, I said, but I've been thinking, she said, about what each of you actually needs. And I've been thinking about what I actually have that's worth giving. She looked at her teacup. The money is the obvious thing, the house is the obvious thing. But I've been doing something else for 2 years, and I want you to know it exists, even if I can't tell you what's in it yet. What have you been doing? I asked. She smiled. Writing, she said. My mother had been a high school principal for 29 years before she retired. In those 29 years, she had written personally by hand. In the same precise schoolteacher's cursive she had used since she was 16, approximately 400 letters of recommendation for students, faculty, parents, and colleagues. She believed that a letter written by the right person, at the right time, could change the direction of someone's life. She had tested this belief professionally for 3 decades. In the last 2 years of her life, she had applied it one final time. I want to be precise about what the will reflected, because precision is important here, and because imprecision is how these situations become mythology. The will reflected financial stewardship. It reflected the fact that Celeste had been my mother's power of attorney for 9 years, had managed her banking, had reviewed her investment accounts, had handled her property tax appeals and her Medicare supplemental insurance and the legal paperwork of an elderly woman's life, with the competence of someone who had been trained specifically for that kind of work. The will reflected what was measurable. What it did not reflect was the 6 weeks in 2019, the Tuesday visits, the 3 a.m. tea, the 8 years of phone calls that averaged 47 minutes. I know this because my phone carrier produces annual usage summaries, and I have kept them, not strategically, but because I am a person who does not delete things. It also did not reflect the specific conversation I had had with my mother in February of the year she died, which I have thought about every day since. She had asked me over the phone whether I was happy, not how are you, whether I was happy. I had told her the truth, that I was stretched thin, that the school district budget cuts had reduced my department, that I had been supplementing my salary for 3 years by teaching private lessons on weekends, that my apartment lease was coming up, and I was uncertain whether I could afford to renew at the new rate. She had listened. She had not said I'll help or I'll put some money aside. She had said, I want to ask you something. If you could do anything with your music, anything at all, without the constraint of what's practical, what would you do? I had told her. A music program, community-based, for kids in Atlanta who couldn't afford private lessons. I had been sketching the idea for 4 years and had never had the capital to make it real. She had been quiet for a moment. Tell me more about that, she said. I told her more. That was February, she died in October. And I had not once, not in any of the conversations we had between February and October, connected those 2 moments. The conversation about the music program and the conversations about the second document she was writing. I connected them in the car on the way to Hartwell and Pierce, 40 minutes before Bernard opened the cream-colored envelope. I had sat in the parking garage for 6 minutes, alone, before I walked in. Because I thought I understood what my mother had done, and I thought I needed to be very composed before I found out whether I was right. She had driven to a law office knowing her mother had left the house, the investments, the car, everything measurable to her sister. She had driven there anyway. She had sat in a parking garage for 6 minutes, and she had walked in and taken her seat and listened to every word of the primary will without flinching. Because she already knew, from a February phone call, and a woman who had spent 3 decades understanding exactly what a letter from the right person could do, that the second envelope was not an afterthought. Stay with me. In the 11 days between my mother's death and the will reading, Celeste managed the arrangements with the efficiency that has always been her most reliable quality. She coordinated the funeral home. She notified the relevant institutions. She handled the death certificate filings. She was, in these days, the person our family needed her to be: organized, clear-headed, operational. She also did something that I noted and did not comment on. She called Bernard Hartwell's office 3 times, not for logistical reasons. I know this because Mrs. Dunn, who had known my mother for 51 years, and who has the particular gift of gentle omniscience that certain women of a certain age develop, mentioned it to me on the phone 2 days before the reading. Celeste has been asking Bernard about the document, Mrs. Dunn said, specifically about whether there are any instruments beyond the primary will. What did he tell her? I asked. That all relevant documents would be addressed at the reading. I held the phone. She seems very certain, Mrs. Dunn said. She's always certain, I said. This is different, Mrs. Dunn said. This is the certainty of someone who believes they already know the answer. I thought about that for a long time. Celeste's certainty was not unfounded. She had managed my mother's affairs for 9 years. She had reviewed financial documents, signed as power of attorney, been present for every practical decision. She knew the account balances. She knew the property assessments. She had, in all likelihood, had conversations with my mother about the estate that I had not been part of. She knew the primary will, because she had been living adjacent to it for a decade. What she did not know was what had been placed in a cream-colored envelope with wax seal in the top drawer of my mother's writing desk, the desk in the study. The room that was specifically my mother's, the room where she wrote her letters and read her books and where Celeste, who dealt in practical matters, had not spent much time. On the morning of the reading, Celeste wore a gray suit and arrived first. She was composed, professional, and in the way of someone who has already accepted an outcome and arrived only to receive confirmation, calm. She was certain she knew what was in the envelope. She was right about one thing. She was wrong about what that meant. Bernard Hartwell had received the second envelope from my mother in September, 6 weeks before her death. She had brought it to his office personally, without Celeste, without a scheduled appointment, as a walk-in. His assistant had noted the date and time in the office log, September 14th, 2:17 p.m. My mother had handed him the envelope, told him it was to be opened at the will reading after the primary document had been fully read, and left. She had been there for 11 minutes. Bernard had not seen her again before she died. Bernard Hartwell broke the wax seal with a letter opener. The room was very still. He removed 4 folded sheets of paper, cream, the same quality as the envelope, the same handwriting on the outside now continued within. He unfolded them with the careful hands of a man who has handled important documents for 50 years and understands that care is a form of respect. He read silently for 45 seconds. Then he looked up. He looked at me specifically, for a moment, with the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he had suspected but not known. Then he said, "This is a letter of instruction and personal bequest, executed by Helen Grace Abernethy on September 14th of this year, witnessed and notarized by this office. It is a legally binding supplement to the primary will and constitutes a separate testamentary document under Georgia law." Celeste's composure moved, just slightly. The way composure moves when it encounters something it did not account for. Bernard began to read. "Dear Bernard and dear family, if you're hearing this, I want to explain some things that a will cannot explain, because a will is a list, and a list doesn't have a voice." My mother's voice. Through Bernard's. Her precision, her rhythm, the particular way she built a sentence toward its point. "I have left my practical assets to Celeste, because Celeste has managed my practical life with skill and loyalty for 9 years. That is appropriate, and I am grateful for it. The house, the finances, the car, these reflect what she has done for me. I want her to have them without condition and without ambiguity. Celeste looked at the table. But I have been thinking for 2 years about what I actually have to give, and I have concluded that the most valuable thing I have is not in any account balance. Bernard turned the page. On February 17th of this year, I had a conversation with my daughter Iris that I have not stopped thinking about. She told me about something she has been building in her mind for 4 years, a music program for children in Atlanta who cannot access what music gives you, because they were born without the specific economic circumstance that makes access possible. I looked at the table. I know what music gave Iris. I watched it give it to her. I also know what Iris has given this family in the years that don't have line items, the presence, the conversation, the 3 a.m. tea. These things don't show up in an estate inventory. They show up only if you were there to receive them. The room was completely silent. I have spent the past 8 months doing what I know how to do. I have written letters. Bernard turned the second page. Attached to this document are 22 letters, written by me over 8 months, addressed to individuals and foundations in Atlanta and Georgia, with whom I have professional relationships from my years in education. Each letter advocates for Iris Abernethy Marsh's music program proposal, which I have titled, in these letters, the Helen Abernethy Community Music Initiative. With Iris's permission in spirit if not in fact, as she does not know I have done this, my Aunt Rowena made a sound. I have also included a letter to First Meridian Wealth Management, instructing them that the $95,000 in my personal savings account, separate from the investment account left to Celeste, is to be released to Iris Abernethy Marsh as seed funding for this initiative. Upon my death, the savings account has not been referenced in the primary will because it was established separately, and Bernard has the account documentation. Bernard looked at me. $95,000, he said, plus the 22 letters. I looked at my mother's handwriting on the pages in his hands. The letters are the more important part, Bernard continued reading. Money starts something. The right letters open doors that money cannot buy. I spent 30 years learning which doors respond to which keys. I wrote these letters as carefully as I have written anything in my life. They are my last professional act and my last act as her mother. He turned the final page. Iris, if you're hearing this, I want you to know that I heard you in February. I hear you every time you play. Build it. The children are waiting. Bernard set the pages down. He folded his hands. The room existed in the particular silence that follows when something that cannot be undone has just been said aloud. Celeste looked at me. I looked at her. I did not smile. I did not perform anything. I looked at her the way you look at someone when the moment is too large for expression and only presence is appropriate. The 22 letters, Celeste said finally to Bernard. Her voice was controlled, professional, the voice of a woman processing an unexpected variable. Who are they addressed to? Foundation directors, school district superintendents, state education board members. One is addressed to the governor's office of education, Bernard said. Your mother was thorough. 22 letters from a woman who had spent 29 years learning exactly how professional advocacy works, who had written 400 letters of recommendation in her career and knew which words opened which doors. And $95,000 in a savings account that had never appeared in a financial summary because it had been built quietly over 8 months, specifically for this purpose. My mother had not left me what she had left me what I needed. Stay with me for what the letters produced. Bernard provided the 22 letters to me in a separate folder, cream, matching the envelope, everything consistent. I read them that evening, alone in the guest room of my Aunt Rowena's house in Macon. In the specific, concentrated quiet of someone reading something that will not be available to read again in quite the same way. My mother had written each letter personally. No template, no repetition of phrasing, each one calibrated to its recipient. She had drawn on 30 years of professional relationships to establish credibility. And she had deployed that credibility in the precise language of someone who knew how funding decisions are made and what language moves them. Letter 1, to the Executive Director of the Georgia Arts Foundation, with whom my mother had served on a curriculum development committee in 2009. She referenced that work specifically. She described my proposal with the kind of concrete operational detail that grant reviewers require. She attached a one-page program summary she had written herself, based on the conversation we had had in February. Which was, I read this with the specific sensation of being seen across a distance, more accurate to what I had been imagining than anything I had written down. Letter 7, to the Superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools, whom my mother had mentored early in his career when he was a vice principal at a Macon middle school. She did not mention that relationship obliquely. She named it directly and used it as the foundation for a specific request. Consideration of a partnership between the school district and a community music initiative that would place instruction in Title I schools. Letter 14, to the Program Director of the Whitmore Family Foundation, a private philanthropic organization based in Atlanta that funds arts education initiatives. My mother had been connected to the Whitmore family through her church for 22 years. Letter 22, to the Director of the Governor's Education Initiative. I read all 22. My mother had not written advocacy letters. She had written a coordinated campaign, each letter a different angle of approach, each one timed to arrive in inboxes around the same week, creating the impression of broad support from multiple directions. She had understood that a single letter from a respected figure opens a door. 22 letters from a respected figure, arriving simultaneously, creates a movement. I called my colleague at the Atlanta music community, a woman named Sandra Reeves, who runs a nonprofit arts organization and who knows the funding landscape the way cartographers know coastlines. I read her 3 of the letters. She was quiet for a moment. Your mother wrote these. Yes, Helen Abernethy, the principal. Yes, Iris. A pause. She wrote to James Whitmore. Letter 14. The Whitmore Foundation gave $1.2 million in arts education grants last year, Sandra said. James Whitmore does not respond to cold outreach, ever. I have tried for 3 years. He responded to my mother in 2001 when she advocated for a student of hers who needed a music scholarship, I said. She reminded him of that in letter 14. Another pause. You need to send those letters, Sandra said, as soon as possible. With the $95,000 as proof of initial capitalization. I know, I said. Iris. Do you understand what she built for you? I looked at the stack of cream-colored pages on the bed in my aunt's guest room. I'm starting too, I said. The Helen Abernethy Community Music Initiative was incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit in Georgia in January, 3 months after my mother's death. The $95,000 seed funding covered the incorporation costs. The first program cites lease deposit, equipment, and 6 months of operating expenses. The Georgia Arts Foundation responded to letter 1 within 3 weeks of my sending it. A phone call with the executive director, a site visit, and a grant application process that concluded with a first-year award of $78,000. The Atlanta Public Schools superintendent responded to letter 7 personally. A meeting in February produced a partnership agreement. 3 Title I elementary schools in the Southwest Atlanta cluster, each receiving the program on a weekly basis. Beginning in the fall semester. The Whitmore Foundation responded to letter 14 in February. James Whitmore's program officer contacted me for an initial conversation that lasted 40 minutes and covered my mother's original proposal summary in detail, the one she had written from our February conversation, which I had read and wept over and revised only slightly because it was already more right than anything I had written myself. The Whitmore Foundation awarded the initiative a 3-year grant of $210,000, $70,000 annually, confirmed in April. By June, 8 months after the will reading, the Helen Abernethy Community Music Initiative had secured $383,000 in first-year and multi-year funding commitments. We served 67 children in our first semester. In the fall expansion, we will serve 114. Celeste called me in March. It was the first call between us since the will reading. It lasted 11 minutes and covered, in the particular careful language of two sisters navigating a changed landscape, the practical matters of the estate settlement. She was professional. She was fair. She was the person she has always been in practical matters. At the end of the call, she said, "I didn't know about the letters." "I know," I said. "Or the savings account." "I know," a pause. "She didn't tell me." "She didn't tell me either," I said, "not specifically." "She told me she was writing." "That's all." "She told me she was writing," I said, "and that she'd been thinking about what she actually had to give." And then she asked me what I would do if I could do anything with the music. Silence on the line. "She listened," I said. For 8 months she worked on the answer. Celeste was quiet for a long time. "That sounds like her," she said finally. "Yes," I said. "It does. I have thought a great deal about the phrase Celeste said at the will reading. You get nothing. Mom made that very clear. She believed it completely when she said it. She had 9 years of proximity to the practical architecture of my mother's estate, and she believed that architecture was the whole of what my mother had prepared. She was not wrong about what she knew. She was simply unaware of what she didn't know. And what she didn't know is the center of everything I want to say here. My mother spent 8 months working on something that no one could see from the outside. She did not announce it. She did not reference it in family conversations. She did not leave a trail that Celeste's 3 phone calls to Bernard Hartwell could have found. She built it in her study, at her writing desk, in the early mornings before the household woke. In the disciplined quiet of a woman who had spent her professional life understanding the difference between the obvious form of a gift and its most effective form. The obvious form would have been money. She left me money too, but the $95,000 is not what I think about. I think about letter 14. I think about my mother at 78 years old, sitting at her writing desk, recalling a phone call from 2001 when she had advocated for a student who needed a scholarship, and reaching back 22 years to invoke that relationship in the service of her daughter's dream. That is not estate planning. That is the application of a lifetime's understanding of how the world actually works, deployed with surgical precision on behalf of someone who did not know it was being done for them. She saw me. Not the version of me that appears in an asset inventory, not the daughter without the property or the investment account or the Volvo. The version of me that played piano at the church and drove 3 hours on a random Tuesday and sat up at 3 a.m. making tea and told her in February about the children who were waiting for what music gives you. She saw that version, and she spent 8 months making sure the world would see it too. I want to say something to every person who is currently sitting with a version of you get nothing, who has been told, in whatever form that telling takes, that the measurable things have gone elsewhere and the immeasurable things don't count. The measurable things are not the whole of what anyone has to give. Your mother, your grandmother, your mentor, the people who have seen you over a long time, they accumulate something that doesn't appear on any balance sheet. They accumulate knowledge of what you need that money cannot provide. They accumulate relationships, credibility, professional history, the specific currency of people who have spent decades doing work that the world respects. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they spend that currency on you, in ways you won't know about until you're sitting in a conference room on a Tuesday afternoon and a cream-colored envelope gets opened. My mother did not leave me what she had. She left me what she knew, and what she knew was worth more than the house, more than the investments, more than every line item in the primary will. She knew which doors opened to which letters. She knew because she had spent 30 years opening them, and she used that knowledge in her last months to open them for me. 114 children in the fall. 67 in the spring. Every one of them the reason she picked up a pen. The most valuable thing you have is not in any account balance. It's in what you know. And what you know about the people you love. Use it while you can. Write the letter, open the door. The children are waiting. The Helen Abernethy Community Music Initiative. Year 1, 67 children. Year 2, 114 children. Funding secured, $383,000. Letters written by Helen Grace Abernethy, 22. Hours spent at the writing desk, unknown. The wax seal is in a frame on my desk. Next to the program summary, she wrote from our February phone call. She heard me. She spent 8 months answering. Write the letter. Open the door. The children are always waiting. If you have ever been told, you get nothing. If you have ever been the one whose contribution didn't appear in the inventory. If you have ever had someone in your life who saw you clearly and worked quietly to make the world see it too, leave 2 words below. She heard me. That's all. And if someone in your life has a dream they have been describing in those late-night conversations that seem to go nowhere, maybe they're going somewhere you can't see yet. The most valuable thing you have is not in any account balance. It's in what you know. Use it.